Don't treat language as a system of knowledge to be studied, but treat it as a dynamic process of listening, understanding, expressing meaning, and connecting with other humans. Now, language education takes a much more communication-based approach, doing dialogues, repeated exposure, and improvisation.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and language acquisition. This week, on Speaking of Language,
Dr. Serene Wang joins us to discuss the power of chunking in language learning for more effective communication and understanding.
Welcome to a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelica Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's media manager.
Our third LRC speaker is in the studio with us today. Dr. Serene Wang will give a talk titled Chunking in the Second Language, Implications for Language Learning and Teaching this afternoon.
For those listeners who are tuning in on April 22nd, you can catch Dr. Wang's talk at 4 p.m. today at the LRC or on Zoom. But for now, let's dive into chunking and real-time language processing. Welcome to Speaking of Language, Serene.
I am extremely honored to be here.
And we are extremely excited to welcome you back. So, Serene, before we start talking about chunking and real-time language processing, can you please talk a little bit more about your background and your path with languages? What does that look like?
Okay, so I grew up in China, and the Chinese education system is very different from here. Instead of encouraging students to explore and study new knowledge based on their personal preferences, we were forced to master the same set of skills, learning the same 12 subjects every single semester with the same group of people all the time. And I was not thrilled in this system. I hated all the subjects except for Chinese and English.
Oh.
Yeah, I just felt very connected to language in a way. I remember being able to recite whole textbooks
Oh, wow.
when I was in the first grade. It was not assigned by the teacher.
Yeah.
And I, while on my way home from school, I would recite the whole book rather than talking about anything else every single day.
Yeah.
And for English, I guess, later when we got smartphones, people started listening to music all the time while they are, commuting, doing dishes, cooking, whatever. I tend to use that kind of time just listen to podcasts and audiobooks,
nice.
like all the verbal information. However, I was monolingual until I was some 15, 16 years old.
Okay. And how did English become more dominant then?
So for high school, I went to this international program where we learned basically nothing but English.
All right. Well, Serene, you are no stranger to Cornell and the LRC. You defended your dissertation here last year. Woo-hoo! Hooray. Yeah. And we're so excited to hear more about your research and its implications for language learning and teaching. Let's start out by explaining what chunking is.
Chunking is the process by which smaller units are grouped into larger and coherent units.
Called chunks.
Yes.
Can you give us an example?
I would present a list of 12 words. They are either presented as discrete lexical units or as 4 3-word trigrams.
What's a discrete item versus some of those 2, 3, 4 chunks?
Like a 3-word chunk would be by and large, or like access to electricity.
Gotcha.
But then if they are arranged in a random order, it's going to be still the same three words, but then you cannot store all three words as a coherent linguistic unit.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So large and by, right? That would not work. That does not compute,
Right.
right? Because it is by and large and not large and by. Gotcha. Okay. How is this relevant for language for communication in general, whether you are applying chunking in your first language or in your second language?
I think that relates to like what the essence of language is when you use it in communication. And I think the essence of using language in communication is real-time information processing. And so when you are listening to other people talk, once a sound is made by the other person, the sound is quickly disappearing
Right.
from the physical world.
Sure.
You cannot trace it back. You cannot replay. And like subsequent sounds coming in would also like override the signals produced before.
Right.
And normally when a native English speaker talk at a normal speech rate, they produce about 150 words per minute. And that's about 5 to 6 syllables per second.
Wow.
If you break it
that's a lot.
down further, it's 10 to 15 phonemes, or the smallest units of sound per second.
Wow.
And so humans produce language at a very fast pace, and the speech signals are constantly disappearing. On top of that, the working memory is also very limited.
Right.
You can only hold and process about 3 to 5 units at a time. And so you are receiving large amounts of information, disappearing constantly, overloading your working memory. How do you handle that information in real time? Right.
Yes, I think this is particularly interesting then when we think about second language learning and teaching. So we know that what our teachers notice a lot in their language classrooms is that students might know a ton of vocabulary and they might know the grammatical rules. They do well on discrete item tests, right? But then they struggle in face-to-face real conversation. So how does chunking help us understand that, or how can we use that really to bridge that gap between everything that's in our students' heads, but then that real-time processing?
Yeah, so I think a lot of language learners who already have a complete or functional system of the first language and the conceptual world, they would approach the second language differently than babies who are learning their first languages naturalistically. And as you said, the second language learner might have a lot of like vocabulary and grammatical knowledge, but that knowledge is built not through real-time processing of continuous, fast, fleeting linguistic inputs, but from translating single words, studying what's on paper. So like they treat the second language as a system of knowledge to be studied rather than a dynamic process of listening, understanding, expressing meaning, and connecting with other humans. And so when infants and babies, they learn their first language naturalistically, their caregivers tend to talk to them in complete sentences.
Right.
For example, my mom might say to me, 看这儿有个大苹果. If I translate this sentence to you, you would understand what my mom was saying. Look, there's a big apple. You know what to do when you're told to look.
Right.
You know there is means something exists. You know how a big apple differs from a small apple. But as a Chinese baby learning my first language, I didn't know any of that.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
didn't know where words start and end. I didn't know what things mean. I I have to listen to the whole thing while it's fleeting and pay attention to my surroundings, pay attention to where my mom is looking, and figure out what that sentence might mean. And then through repeated exposure to co-occurring sound sequences and pairings with meaning, I eventually learn how to segment sentences into workable linguistic units and map those linguistic labels onto the concepts that I'm simultaneously learning as a child. But for second language speakers, right, if they approach the language through the translation approach, because they a lot of times wouldn't allow themselves to listen to full sentences where they don't know where word boundaries are, where
Right.
they have no idea what's going on. They really want to make sense of the sentence being uttered. And so they want to write it down. They want to be able to work on it visually and concretely
Right.
as learning, new knowledge offline, right? Like they take this offline analytic approach to language learning rather than,
Yeah.
talking to people or being talked at.
Well, and it's interesting, actually. I'm just thinking, every morning I do my little Duolingo lesson. I kind of resent it. But I mean, that is so discrete, right? I mean, it's a drag and drop and you completely restructure the sentence. And that works great for me as a learner. But that is not how a first language would ever be acquired, right? Because I do see word boundaries. I do see everything. And as an adult, I personally appreciate that. I mean, I know that that's not the most effective way to learn, and I am making zero progress in my Portuguese. But yeah, this is fascinating.
So, Serene, what would a more chunk-based approach actually look like in a typical university language classroom? So rather than teaching separate pieces like vocabulary here, grammar there, how might an instructor start making that shift without overhauling everything?
When I started my job teaching English at TSC BOCES, the more experienced teachers, they would print out these ESL Brains lessons. And there are a lot of fill in the blanks, and they tell me, this is great. Students get to, work on it. They can see concretely what they're building on. I'm not just, telling them things. They're actively trying to think, trying to generate stuff. And when they do listening lessons, they would present the vocabulary words first so that the students can first understand these words
Right.
and then try to find these words while listening to the whole context and then see the words in context while feeling like, oh, I understand that word. I recognize it because I just learned it. But that approach, presenting words before the whole message, is actually disruptive to chunking. There's a study or multiple studies done on the order of presentation. So the amount of exposure, the quality of exposure is all the same, but a group of people, they learned discrete words first, and then they learned the full sentences. The other group of people, they heard full sentences first, and then they learned the discrete words. And then later, when it got tested on the group of people who learned full sentences, did much better at chunking or using the correct grammatical gender for the nouns and verbs.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like maybe similar. We can compare this to why immersion works, right? You get thrown into the whole real-time processing and you have no idea about discrete items, and it might be a struggle at first, but it certainly yields better results.
Yes, a lot of people say, children learn a second language effortlessly, or like a first language even effortlessly. That is not the case. A child For a child to like fully master their first language, it takes about 10 years before they can use the language maturely. And in the meantime, they're just trying to figure things out. They're trying to understand the world, how to build sentences, and they make mistakes. But for adults, like, we don't allow ourselves to be confused, to not understand, to not make sense yet.
Yeah. So, for those colleagues, for those language teachers who are intrigued by chunking but don't know where to begin, like, what are one or two simple, concrete activities that they could incorporate right away to help students build those multi-word units?
So in my language class, whenever we like have to read something, I ask my students to like highlight chunks before we actually like try to understand the passage.
Okay.
So this exercise would make them aware like how prevalent chunks are, or like what words can go together across different situations, like beyond this particular passage that we are reading right now. But it is not enough for them to commit those chunks to long-term memory. And so repeated exposure is very important. So aside from, noticing, you can also teach them chunks, right? Like, rather than vocabulary list, you can do lists of chunks.
Right.
And like these words, they go together as a whole unit. So like instead of teaching intransitive verbs as this verb goes with these prepositions, you teach the whole verb with the preposition as a single chunk. And then you do not teach one verb with multiple prepositions at the same time for students to distinguish and then do fill in the blank questions, because that's offline knowledge. They may be able to do that for future fill in the blank questions, but when they talk, they might still say the wrong prepositions.
Right.
So just teach the verb plus the preposition as one single unit that carries meaning. And as I said before, presenting larger units, like full sentences, is better than to present smaller units and then do larger units.
Right.
You talk about how fast and fleeting language is and how that can create challenges for learners. How can teachers better support students in developing real-time processing skills? So not just understanding slowly and carefully, but actually keeping up with speech as it happens.
I guess just bombard them with fleeting language, right? Like, for example, I have this optional homework for my students where I assign one podcast episode each week, and I ask them to listen to this one episode over and over and over and over throughout the week while they're just living their lives, like walking or like cleaning or like cooking. And so they would be tasked with processing the fleeting language in real time as they are listening to the podcast, but at the same time, they're also being repeatedly exposed to chunks that go together.
Right. Yeah, I'm telling you, immersion, that's all I hear. So, Serene, if there's one takeaway you'd want language teachers to leave with, what would that be? And maybe also you can suggest one small change that any teacher could make tomorrow that would help them move in that direction.
Like I said, don't treat language as a system of knowledge to be studied, but treat it as a dynamic process of listening, understanding, expressing meaning, and connecting with other humans. And I think current language education is already doing a lot better job than, what I had while I was in China trying to learn English. Now, like language education takes a much more communication-based approach rather than memorizing words in isolation, like explaining rules that don't really exist, or do like fill in the blank questions rather than, doing dialogues, repeated exposure, and improvisation. And so I think what really helps with meeting the communicative demands of conversations is through repeated exposures to co-occurring sound sequences that carry meaning and improvising in the moment.
Serene, this is all great to hear about. Is there anything else you're working on right now that you'd like to share?
Oh, that is an interesting question. I am now an ESL teacher at TSCBOCs. I teach my own English class, and I guess I get to be really creative with how I teach. I just told Angelica about like my new approach. So, when you use a textbook, there are characters like Jenny, Danny, Sandy, and Sue, and they have a little fictional life that you have to learn about.
Yep.
But we don't have a textbook. So I was like, why don't we create our own characters? So it started with me asking, what is the gender of her character? Male. What is the name of our character? Matthew. How old is Matthew? 10. And so it started from there. We as a class built this profile of this character. And then I was like, but a 10-year-old might not experience enough life events that's informative for my students. And so by extension, we created this whole fictional family where the youngest was like 7 years old and the oldest was like 72 years old. And so this fictional family covered the entire lifespan. And like any number of life events can happen to them. And then we as a class can like navigate through the life events together while, building practical skills, navigating the target language environment. I think a lot of the educators, they are very good at figuring out like what skills are required for a learner to be proficient. And then they like break down the areas that the learners need to improve on. But by this approach, like language as like a holistic skill is broken down into 4 artificially divided areas of listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And then they would teach like each skill as a like separate thing. And that's why some learners, they might be exceptionally good at reading, but then when they're like trying to communicate with others, they don't really understand or they can't really form coherent sentences. And so I think it's important to like take this holistic approach where you navigate through life events and then you practice all the skills at once.
This is all really fascinating work that you are doing, and it's wonderful that you get to play around with chunking now in your own language classroom. Where can our listeners find out more about you and your work?
I'm not very famous.
Stop it, Serene. In our world, you are very famous.
Oh, I was going to say me neither, but it's never stopped me before.
That is also so not true, Samuel. I mean, the fact that you claim you're not famous, just want to clarify.
Yeah, I currently have a couple of publications. You can just find me on ResearchGate. I publish under Serene Wang.
And we will link to that website in our show notes.
Well, it's been wonderful to hear all about what you've been working on, Serene. Before we sign off, we'd like to ask you for a word in a language you love, maybe are learning, want to learn, that makes you feel inspired. What's that word?
Well, as a chunker, I would opt for a multi-word unit.
All right.
How about emergent bilingual?
Ooh.
So like you are learning a second language, striving to, achieve mastery in the language. You're trying to become bilingual, although you're not there yet. I think this word or this chunk is very inspiring because it kind of incorporates the growth mindset, right? Like you're not failing. You're not bad at the second language. You're just trying. You're improving.
Well, Serene, this was a treat. We are so excited to hear more from you this afternoon. We wish you all the best, and we are so excited to see where you as a chunker are going. But for now, thank you so much for speaking of language with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Be sure to join us next week for our final episode of Season 17. We welcome back Valerie Friedland to hear all about her new book, Why We Talk Funny, and the real story behind our accents. Until then,
Auf Wiederhören.
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu.
and follow Cornell LRC on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelika Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
Recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.